open up?
Is it waiting for us?
This meeting.
Okay, everyone, welcome to tonight's Let's Talk About Race. Before we do get started, I know that there's a really bad storm that...
It skips to the backstop and they hold.
Hello? I ask that everybody please mute themselves at this time. We have a large group expected tonight. We will be going over Zoom protocol, but for now, we'd love to see everyone's face, but we do ask that you mute yourself, okay? Unfortunately, a storm has just started. Fortunately, we're meeting virtually as opposed to at the library, so no one has to drive home tonight, which is a great thing. But we do hope that power remains for everybody because we got a great program tonight and we're hopeful that, you know, the weather does not interfere. Kerwin Webb will be reviewing the Zoom protocol. And as I said, if you could mute yourself, we will be having a Q&A at that point in time. If you unmute yourself, as the conversation is going on and there's something you want brought up during Q&A and you're worried you're going to forget it or whatever, please just put it in the chat. And once the presentation is finished, then we'll get to everybody's questions. I just want you to know that, you know, as with everyone in their life, the Red Bank Public Library has been through amazing changes in the last 15 months. And we have in many ways grown from this time, I think. Our commitment has always been to serve the Red Bank area to the best of our ability. And I really think that we kicked it up during COVID. We have distributed food, we have distributed masks, we have distributed handmade hats, anything pretty much that the community needed. A lot of people were homebound during this time. We tried to deliver materials and we really have, you know, focused on what's best for the community and want to continue doing this. As things changed with us closing and going virtual and doing, you know, curbside service, things are going to change once again in July. On July 6th, the library is hoping that everything goes as planned and we're going to be reopening the library, which will mean the children's room will be open. We won't have as much seating as we used to have, but it will be a very different library. But during this time, we've started doing virtual programming. So, you know, we have greatly expanded programs like this. I mean, our first Let's Talk About Race virtual program had 137 people register for it. That's a heck of a lot bigger audience than we ever had in the library. So we have to rethink how we're going to do some of our programs. I don't want to lose anybody that might be from North Jersey, but so if you have like a preference and you want to email me your preference, virtual programming, in the library program, to be honest, we're going to probably try to do a hybrid where at some point, perhaps in the fall, we come back to the library, but we still are able to share the program virtually. That's going to take a little bit of equipment and practice, but that is our hope as we move forward. Also, just to let you know, I think I mentioned this at our last program, we have started a seed library because, you know, we think gardening is really important and we have had some wonderful contributions from the community of heirloom seeds and organic seeds. And so you can just come to the library and pick up free seeds whenever we're open. We're running low now because we did a seed swap, but if you have seeds to donate, we would love to have them. The truth is that planting seeds, you're not going to be able to do it as much in June as you can now. But if you do have an interest, definitely stop by at the library. As I said, we've got a great program tonight. I thank you all for coming. I really thank our presenters tonight and also Patty White and also Kerwin Webb and our moderator tonight, who is Claire Phelps. So thanks to everybody tonight. Let's keep our fingers crossed that the weather doesn't interfere with our program. And I turn the program over to Kerwin right now to review the Zoom rules. Thanks again for being here.
Lorraine.
Hope she doesn't have the camera up her nose.
No, I don't like this
Hi,
old
Dan.
light, but
Hi,
All
Dan.
right.
Hey, we're
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Really quick, my part is to go over the Zoom etiquette for us so that we can make sure that we all can enjoy the program and everybody can be heard. So what we're going to ask is that everyone, when you're not speaking, we're going to ask that you please mute your computers so that your conversations or background noises won't be heard. I'll do the same thing. Right here, we have video works best if your computer is situated on the table at eye level. But during the program, I'm going to have the presenters spotlighted, so we won't be able to see you. But we will bring you back and ask you to turn on your cameras and open up once it's time for the Q&A and the discussion. There's a speaker view, an active view. You can change it, but for convenience, I'm going to try to make sure that the person who is speaking is the one who is front and center. If you have questions, please use the chat box, and we will try to make sure that we get to them all once the presentation is done. We don't want to take up the time of the presenters as we're doing that. And then at the end of the session, we invite you to stay and become part of the discussion with the Q&A. So at this time, we just invite you to sit back and enjoy the show, the program, and we look forward to all that you bring to it. Claire.
I'm here. Thank you very much, Kerwin. Thank you, Linda. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program tonight. Thank you so much for attending. I'd like to also welcome our presenters and introduce them. We have Claire Garland and Lorraine Stone. And I have some information on their backgrounds. Claire Garland is the director of the Sandhill Indian Historical Association. She has received an award of recognition from the New Jersey Historical Commission in the year 2020. She is the co-chair of Native American History and Life, also a part of the New Jersey Historical Commission, a representative to the same commission on American Indian Affairs. She holds a master's degree in sociological and philosophical foundations of education from Rutgers University Graduate School of Education, and a bachelor's in education from Monmouth University. She is a Verizon Science and Technology grant recipient for the creation of a website, and a Frederick Hip Award recipient for historical grant writing. Welcome, Claire. You're welcome. Lorraine Stone, born and raised in Monmouth County in Asbury Park and Neptune. She is a graduate of Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. She has a degree in mass media and started her career as a print and electronic journalist. She also spent 10 years in corporate communications with IBM, editing and writing speeches for executives. Okay, she left corporate America in 1988 to work for nonprofits, including the Girl Scouts of America and Trinity School for the Arts. In 1998, she returned to dramatic performance, something she had done in her youthful years. And she wrote and performed a one-woman show, and then soon began acting with the Dunbar Repertory Company. From 2005 to 2009, she was a features writer for the Shore African American magazine. And she says that writing has been a very important part of her life. And she's welcomed the opportunity to be involved with the effort to save the T. Thomas Fortune House. And welcome, Lorraine. And now I'd like to introduce Claire Garland and her presentation.
Hello, glad to be with you this evening. I'll start with the first slide called Three Cherokees Visit England as my introduction. If Kerwin could put that first slide up.
Yep, give me 1 second.
While we wait for Kerwin, I also want to let the audience know we're going to try a registration through Zoom next month. So those of you that send a request in and you have to wait until right before the program is about to begin, the day before, will no longer have to wait. If this works as expected, you'll get an answer right away with the Zoom link. If you have any problems, don't hesitate emailing me with your request to be a part of the program.
The picture that you see, I ran into by accident in doing my research, and it was called Three Cherokees Visit England. The picture was in a British newspaper in 1762. These three Cherokee chiefs had gone to England to discuss the proclamation line of 1763, which we all remember reading about, which was the line that white settlers were not supposed to cross over the Appalachian Mountains. When I saw the picture, I said to myself, why is it that I didn't know about this? How was it that I never knew that Cherokee diplomats and chiefs left the country, went to England, met with King George III? How was it that I didn't know? And I felt as though if I didn't know this, what else is it that I didn't know about my grandmother's people? Come to find out, there was another visit made in 1730, was written up in the British Gazetteer on the 27th of June in 1730, and also another article in the London Journal on the 15th of August, 1730. This was another group of Cherokee diplomats that made the trip to England. They had treaties with the British. They stayed for 4 months. They signed a treaty known as the Articles of Friendship and Commerce, and they returned to South Carolina, sailing on October the 8th, arriving February the 18th in 1731. So needless to say, I was amazed that mostly what you hear about Native Americans is that they were all savages and lots of other derogatory remarks. You don't hear about diplomats going to negotiate treaties and bargains and deals for their people and their community.
Okay.
The Cherokee recognized the only way to survive was to adapt, to change. They believed in their deals with the British and the king. They set up trading connections, trading paths to Richmond, Petersburg, Charlestown, all across the colonies. And of course, the mainstay of the trade were pelts, and they traded for the knives, the metal goods, ammunition, and firearms, which led to problems. And trading for firearms was the trigger that ended their existence in the East. The eastern band of the Cherokees still remains in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. The western band was forced to move in 1828 off their homelands after gold was discovered. They walked 116 days to Oklahoma, where the western tribe remains. My grandmother's people started showing up on the New Jersey censuses in the early 1800s. So I have been able to track them back to 1780, which was 9 years before George Washington was inaugurated president. Tax records here in Monmouth County, which they called Shrewsbury at the time, showed that they were landowners here. So they didn't all move west. Some of them stayed. They assimilated, they worked, they were part of the community. So that brings me to next slide. New Jersey. sometimes called, before it was New Jersey, New Belgium, New Netherlands, New Holland. New Jersey is a later term that we use, but you notice right around here in Monmouth County, all around the Dutch names of streets, Van Bracken, Van Schoot, the Dutch were here before the English, and their history and remnants of their remainder still spread all over New Jersey, especially Bergen and northern New Jersey, and of course Monmouth County. English fishing boats record interaction with the natives in 1480. Columbus even records canoes holding 80 people traveling across the Caribbean, transporting men and goods around the islands. Now, when you hear about Columbus, you don't hear about canoes the size that could hold 80 men. You might see a picture of a canoe with maybe 1 or 2 paddlers. 80 people in a canoe is not quite the canoe that we think of. That is a ship. If you look at the map, you can see a number of paths that came across New Jersey. One of those paths was Sycamore Avenue, which runs right here through Tinton Falls over to the ocean, to Oceanport, and over to the beach. Other paths became our major highways, Highway 80 and 87 and Atlantic City Expressway, all followed the Indian paths, were later turned into wagon paths, widened, and then gradually became highways and superhighways. So our heritage goes back hundreds of years. Next slide. Is the area of the Lenape people and the tribes that and clans that lived in this area. Some of the names are still with us: Rockaway, Matitaconk, Navesink, Manasquan, Hoboken, Weehawken, Raritan, just to name a few. So the names are with us, and that's one of the ways that we realize that we are still surrounded by the Native American culture. The Dutch East Indies Company settled in what was New Amsterdam. The stock still exists on the New York Stock Exchange. You can buy it today even. The Dutch remain the largest landowners in Manhattan today, along with Trinity Church. As of today, there are 576 or 7 federally recognized, state recognized tribal groups in the US, more in Canada, and more in Central and South America. When I say Indian, what do you think of? If I say European, what do you think of? And I think that's the way to understand the word. European could be any of a number of different cultures: Greek, French, Spanish, Russian, English, Irish, and it's the same with Indian. When I say Indian, it can't be just one monolith group. It's a number of different languages, cultures, traditions, alliances. And I have another question for you. You have on long pants tonight? If you do, you are dressing like an Indian, because Europeans did not wear long pants. They wore skirts and bloomers and knickers and all kinds of things. but not long pants. Long pants protect your legs from thorns and bushes and cold weather, which the Europeans didn't know too much about. So next slide. When we're talking about Native culture surrounds us, I wanted to share some of the references and resources with you so that you can also do a little research and reading on anything that might be of interest to you. On speaking Native words, Algonquin and Iroquois and Munsee were the three branches of languages. Are words like buffalo, moose, caribou, raccoon, opossum, chipmunk, barracuda, manatee, puma, jaguar, chigger, skunk, hurricane, blizzard, husky, kayak, canoe, tomahawk, sachem, papoose, caucus, powwow, were all words that we use every day now, and they were all words that came right from a Native American language. Also squaw, which has a very negative meaning to it. Thousands of Native words still infuse our culture and language. Maize, beans, squash, pumpkin, carrots, peas, turnips, manioc, peppers, tomatoes, potato, 500 different kinds of potatoes, peanuts, bananas, coffee, cocoa, vanilla, things we use every day and we don't think about them, but they're all native to the New World. Maize yields more grain per acre than any other crop. More corn is planted and exported in the US than any other crop. Over 4,000 items are made with corn. Corn is a New World crop. Corn feeds Africa and Europe. Corn brought the height and weight of Europeans up higher than it had ever been before they had corn. We use phrases: bury the hatchet, playing possum, smoking the pipe, bootleg liquor, firewater, honky tonk, okay, Conestoga, Yankee, all words that came from our native languages. And of course, our states: Connecticut, Massachusetts were tribes, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, Utah, Iowa, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Illinois for Illinois, Arizona, Yukon, Ontario, Wyoming, Minnesota, Wisconsin were all names of tribes. Many are still there. And here in New Jersey are towns of Watchung, Metuchen, Piscataway, Passaic, Hoboken, Weehawken, Raritan, Matawan. Matawan had a longer extension on it, as many of these names did, and the Europeans just kind of chopped them off and made it easier to say. Manasquan, Navesink, Poughkeepsie, Sing Sing, Canarsie, Montauk, Saponic, we call Sag Harbor, Hackensack, Peapack, Secaucus, Jamaica, Tuxedo, Saratoga, Ronkonkoma, Paramus, Squonkam, Manalapan meant place of good bread, Ramapo, Rockaway, Portapeck, right here in Oceanport. All the street names have Indian names. Rahway, Mantaloking, Picatinny, Sagamore. Names that surround us are still here, were written up in deeds, places on the map, still on the map, and we use every day. Appalachia or Appalachia, Adirondack, Taconic, Allegheny, Pocono, Shenandoah, Susquehanna, just to name a few mountains, Potomac, Chesapeake, Rancocas, some of the rivers, and chiefs, famous chiefs, Cadillac, Pontiac, Seattle, Gowanus, and Wanamassa right here in Monmouth County. Next slide. Another interesting book, Manhattan to Menacing, covers American Indian place names in the New York, New Jersey area. Of course, New Jersey was settled by Dutch farmers in the 1620s. They bought land and traded with native tribes here on Sandy Hook. They didn't understand selling the land. They understood maybe renting it, or what we might call leasing. When they went back to pick the plums at Sandy Hook, they were shooed away. They didn't quite understand how you could sell land. Land belonged to the community. And the Navasink, Assapink, Matawan, Shamans, Cheesequakes, Raritans, Nanticokes, and Hackensackes were all different family bands in the area. Pretty soon it became competition for settlements, for trade, and for land. Land meant wealth to the Europeans. Land would produce wealth. Land produced rents and fees and surpluses. Land could not just sit there. Land had to do something. Land had to make money. So that was the major difference in the concept of land to the native people and to Europeans. To the natives, land was community, owned by the community in trust, could not be bought or sold or traded. Europeans had a totally different concept of land and its use. Next slide. This was such a valuable book by Professor Russell Shortall, professor at New York University, who obtained a Rockefeller grant. It took 10 years to translate the minutes of the Dutch governors of New Amsterdam. Got a team together, went to Holland, found the records in a basement. They spent 10 years translating from the Old Dutch to New Dutch and then into English. So it gives us a picture of what was going on in the 1600s, the relations with the native people. Europeans were in awe of the abundance of food here, of fish, of fruits, of berries, of nuts, 300 species of fowl, 40-pound turkeys, game, such availability of everything that they were just amazed at the abundance of the supplies they had here that they did not have in Europe. Of course, they started trading, and one beaver pelt brought in to the Dutch trading post would pay for 9 months' rent back in Holland. So you see, the pelts were were worth quite a bit in Europe. Part of the problem with the native people and the Europeans were the alliances. Next slide, please. The alliances were, you would think that with all the native people here outnumbering the Dutch, outnumbering the English, the French, the Spanish, everybody else, you would think that they could have pushed back and push them back in the sea and come to better terms. But the problem was they all had different alliances with the different groups. They were allied with the Dutch against the English. They were allied with the English against the French. They were allied with the French against the English and the Dutch. They were allied with the Spanish against English, French, and Dutch. Alliances were fluid. They appeared and disappeared. They had alliances with other native tribes and alliances against other native tribes. There were alliances with religious groups, with Christian groups, non-religious groups. There were alliances with trading partner and who was going to pay the most or give them the most or who had the best deal. Of course, my grandmother's people, the Cherokee, were allied with the English. So when the English were pushed out by the revolution, they lost whatever power and land and rights and deals they had also. This was another interesting look at the roots of Dutch culture here in New Jersey. And one other point I'll make is Native people did not have citizenship until 1924. They were restricted from voting. Sometimes even right up until 2020. Many do not have addresses, mailing addresses. If you didn't have a mailing address, you couldn't be registered, you couldn't get a ballot. So certain problems came with Native culture. Next slide. Also, it was illegal for Indians to live in the state of Georgia up until 1980. Couldn't even live in the state. Many intermarriage illegalities still existed on the books between the races. In 1978, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act gave the right to Native people to practice their own religion, gave them freedom of worship, and this is 191 years after the Bill of Rights. And another fact, by 1800, most Native people had never even seen a European. That's kind of a concept it's hard to imagine, but most Europeans were on the coast and had not really spread across the country. This book, Owning New Jersey, was quite interesting because it covers people who lived here in Monmouth County and especially up and down the Menacing River and this part of Red Bank in New Jersey, Middletown. So I found it invaluable to see actually property owners who participated in the community, had businesses, shops, stores that we kind of don't hear about, know about, but they were there. And it's proved by the deeds and the records that were left behind. 75% of the food consumed in the world today originated in North and South America. It came from the Native American diet. Hickory, pecan, avocado, papaya, succotash, tapioca, hominy. Of course, we say hominy grits, squashes, chocolate, gum, latex, and as I said before, over 4,000 products just from corn. The Lenape culture emphasized individual freedom. They had no class system. There was no superiority. There was gender equality. Women voiced their opinions. There was social equality. The important thing was consensus of community life. They shared storage facilities, underground pits. They had plenty of dried food, smoked meat. They always had a stew boiling. They did not use salt or sugar in their diets. And they prepared for droughts and periods of less food, not famines, but less food. In contrast, we look at Europe, which was wrecked with plagues from the 1300s and on, epidemics, malnourished people, rotten teeth, scarred skin, poor diet, lacking in vitamins, especially vitamin C, lacking in fruit, vegetables, consumed by plagues, epidemics, and death. It's interesting to see the letters that were written by people like Benjamin Franklin and people of that era. The first thing they would mention is, wow, look at their skin, look at their teeth. They don't have scars, they don't have pock marks, they don't have rotten teeth. They were just amazed at the physical condition that the native people were in compared to the average European. Next slide, please. There were descriptions of strong, muscular, well-fed people, no fat people, lean, tall, straight, healthy. The Europeans needed water when they pulled into a place on land. First thing they wanted to trade was for water. They couldn't carry enough fresh water from Europe to go on their travel. So they had to pull in, just as they did in Sandy Hook, and look for water, trade for food. They traded manufactured goods, cloth, for food and water. One research project by Paul Boyd showed that the Lenape villages were located about every 8 miles, a day's walk between villages, like one in Fairhaven, one in Red Bank, one in Middletown, one in Locust, one in Rumson area. About every 8 miles or so, you would find a pile of shells called middens. And this was like their dump. There was one at Oyster Point, right there where the hotel is across the river. The oysters are making a comeback to the river from what I hear. And next slide, please. This was one of the most interesting things I read this winter. Really covers so much of the history of the Indian world that existed from 1750s up until Washington died in 1799. And his perspective, it's all based on military records and letters, and it won the Mount Vernon Book Award for the year. And what an invaluable story of what was going on. Washington buying land all through Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Maryland, because land was your retirement. If you had the land, you could sell it, and that gave you something to live on as you retired. So it was in his best interest to kick the Indians off as far away as possible, break up the trade deals. That's one reason why they broke with the English. Didn't really have that much to do with freedom and independence. That's all really a myth. It had to do with land. It had to do with feeling as though they had not been compensated by the British. And so they're going to take it any way they could, and they did. Another part of culture are saunas. The Indians had their sweat lodges. Our steam rooms in our gyms. The Indians heated rocks for steam. And they knew how to relax and take care of their bodies and physical well-being. They worked as teams, not as individuals. They hunted, gathered, stored, prepared together. Another point I wanted to make was about the Lenape mail carriers that were written about as the most reliable, efficient runners across the state, getting messages from fort to fort, across to Pennsylvania, from New Amsterdam, down to Cape May, over to Philadelphia, down to Wilmington, all the early forts. There was no postal system, but the Lenape mail carriers were the forerunners. They knew the paths. They could cross New Jersey in about 3 days. They knew the rivers. They could get messages back and forth, and they were paid for their what we would call shipping or stamps. They were paid in goods and money. They earned a living. They knew how to avoid conflicts. They knew where was safe to go and not safe to go. The myth that everybody left is just kind of not accurate. Villages remained in the areas for years, through the winter, through the summer. Some seasonal travelers did come to the shore, just as people do now. And they go home, but other people stay. Other people are year round. Next slide, please. My grandmother's brothers and cousins here. Also, I wanted to show you this. This was, not sure if you can see that, Hidden History of Monmouth County. This was by Rick Geffen, published last year. He included the story of the Sandhill in the hidden history part of it. Appreciate it. And some of these items that you see, I have in the collection that came from the Neptune Historical Museum. And some of them I take out when I used to do live talks here and there. But I like Zoom too. So next slide, please. And this was a council meeting. My grandmother's right there in the middle, Adeline Richardson Thomas, surrounded by her cousins, sister, and first cousins. James Reevy is on the left. Some of you might have known or heard his name. He was the director of the New Jersey Indian Office till he passed in 1998. And in summers, I remember going to powwows at the Richardson Reservation up on Sand Hill in Neptune. Some property is still there, owned by some of the descendants. Other property was turned into green acres, and some property has been sold. Next slide. And I would encourage you to visit the Museum of American Indian in Washington, D.C., right on the mall, next to the NASA Museum, and start at the top and have a trip all the way down through the ages and eat and enjoy the exhibits and the artwork. I'm not sure if it's open, but one day it will be. And just thinking as you travel, as you tour, how much of the culture of Native American culture is still with us through the names that are still here and will always be here. Navasink, I doubt if they're going to change it. We can't imagine calling Navasink River anything other than what it is, and the same with many places in our state. The Lenape remained here. They assimilated with other cultures. They intermarried. My family intermarried with Europeans, especially Dutch, Africans, and also South Americans and Asians. So we are a global community, a global family here in the Northeast, as all people are. And I hope you enjoyed being surrounded by American culture. Sometimes we don't realize we are, but hope you enjoyed the visit to a Native American world. And I'd like to introduce my friend Lorraine for her presentation.
Okay, I think I just successfully unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much, Claire. I want to say, by way of introduction of my story, when I was first asked if I had something that might dovetail on Claire's presentation this evening, the first thing I wanted to do was talk to Claire and see what she had in mind that I might make a story out of, or might some telling that I might share. And she said, well, I think you should look at Fairhaven. You know, I knew Fairhaven was there, but I didn't know, I had no idea how much I didn't know about Fairhaven. And what I found as I dug was it would take me more than many 15-minute presentations to talk about the history of Fairhaven, the history of freedmen and indigenous peoples. It is incredibly rich, and I am always bowled over when I come across this much information and see that it's not taught in schools, that our children who live here don't know anything about the history of the places that they were born and grew up. Okay, so now that's the end of that, and on to the story, which, you know, as a storyteller, I want to say once upon a time. So I will say that it wasn't long ago, but probably none of us was born, although we may still have some family members living who were born. So I'm going to start the story in 1923 with the birth of Raymond Taylor. Now, there were 3 Taylor boys. They were born in Long Branch. Their father was Raymond Sr., their mother was Clara, and they also began their life with a grandmother in the home that was their mother's mother. Well, Raymond Taylor Sr. went off to war, World War I, and he returned very, very injured. He was a victim of nerve gas. And Raymond Jr., who was telling me this story, remembered that his father lost his limbs, and when he came back, he got around town on a scooter. It made me think of Porgy and Bess. This made me think of the way that Porgy maneuvered in that play. And I'm sure it was exactly the same. But his father didn't live long, in spite of the fact that he learned how to propel himself. He died, and that left in this was probably 25, 6, 7, a woman with 3 boys and her mother to feed and clothe and house. And how much work could there have been for an indigent Black woman in those days? So she did what I think women have always done and will continue to do. She cared for other people's children. Other people had to work and their children had to go somewhere. So Mr. Taylor tells me that his mother took care of primarily the gypsy children, because the gypsies in Long Branch ran the casino and some of the hotels. And they had to be at work every day, long days, and so she took care of those children. He also told me that there was a bunch of young folk that just ran together and had the best time. He said he and his 2 brothers thought of themselves as the 3 Musketeers, but they had playmates that were Italian, Jewish, who knows, maybe Greek, certainly gypsies. And they ran up and down the boardwalk in Long Branch, and times were very hard. And what they discovered one day when they were under the boardwalk down playing in the sand, they found these boxes. These were ice boxes, okay? The ice kept the food cold that was being served in the casino and the hotel. Well, these little boys found their way into the ice boxes and found hot dogs, and what kid doesn't love a hot dog? And so they took what they could use, what they could consume, took some home to their mother. Also, not too far from the boardwalk, he tells me, there was a lumber yard. And it was locked and well secured, but they learned how to slide into that lumber yard, let themselves in, and put the lock back so it looked like no one had been in. So if you're going to have hot dogs, you got to cook them. So they got wood, which they used for their hot dogs, and maybe even for heating their home. They just had a grand time running up and down, mostly the boardwalk and maybe some of the streets in Long Branch. Their uncle, he told me, was a street sweeper. That would have been his mother's brother. A street sweeper, I'm sorry, in Long Branch. And he also remembered the local midwife, and she delivered everybody's babies, no matter what race. A baby is a baby, and a baby has to come, and she delivered everybody's children. Well, their lives were going on fine, although I imagine they must have been very tough. And it must have been hard for Clara to try to keep her children fed and clothed. Somehow, probably because they weren't going to school regularly, the state stepped in and decided that they were not being properly cared for. And the state took those 3 boys away, put them in a wagon, horse-drawn wagon, and drove them to a new home. Now, they were called state children or state kids, something that Raymond Taylor despises that term until today. He's 90, almost 98 years old, and he still does not like the sound of that. We know them as foster children. So off to Jersey City, they went to this foster home, and they got there, and apparently Jersey City didn't really set with them too well. And they managed to escape. They got themselves back to Long Branch after only 1 day in Jersey City, riding on the back of horse-drawn wagons. They would just hang on, and nobody knew they were there. And they ended up back in Long Branch. I thought that was pretty fantastic. That's like 50 miles. And this was the 20s. How they managed to do it and know exactly where they were going, I'm not sure. But they did. And they were very happy to be back. And I'm sure their mother and grandmother was happy to see them. However, the truant officers or whomever were looking for them as well. They picked them up again. This time they didn't go to Jersey City because apparently that was too easy. They went to Salem. Any of you that know anything about South Jersey, Salem is way down in New Jersey. Country, country, country. And in the 20s, it must have been even more so. So a lot of agriculture, a lot of farms, a lot of open land, very, very different from anything these boys had ever experienced. You know, boardwalk, there was, in Long Branch, there was boardwalk and sand and ocean. And he even remembers seeing the natives come down to the ocean and perform ceremonies before they launched and went off to the oyster beds. And he doesn't know exactly what kind of ceremonies they were, but they may have been ceremonies to give thanks for a safe journey, a good harvest. But when he got to Salem, there was no ocean, no sand, no boardwalk. They did not make it back in a day. He said they ended up in Salem for about 3 years. And of course, it was agricultural, so they learned to plant and harvest. He said they did get to do a little fishing. They trapped rabbits, muskrats, because that was food as well. after 3 years and more watermelon than Raymond Taylor ever wants to see again, he still does not like watermelon. So there must have been a lot of it surrounding them in Salem. They came back to Monmouth County because the state of New Jersey changed its guidelines on foster children. They decided that a child should not be taken out of the county where they were taken from. So they brought them back, and they did get to go back to Long Branch. They got to see their mother, but they didn't get to stay there. They moved them again. And this, Claire, is how I get to Fairhaven. These 3 little boys were brought to a foster mother in Fairhaven, well known to everybody in the area, Ella Corliss. Now, Corliss, Rick Gefkin may be on here tonight, and he has taught me a lot about the name Corliss in Shrewsbury. It's Monmouth County now, but it was Shrewsbury then. I don't know exactly where she got the name Corliss. I'm going to assume that her parents may have been slaves in one of the Corliss households. At any rate, Ella Corliss was born in Fairhaven on Browns Lane. Now, by the time the boys came to her, she was living in the same house where Raymond Taylor lives today, 559 River Road. From the time he was about 10 or 12 years old, he has lived in that home, and at 97, he's still there today. Wow. Not only that, he married and raised 7 children there, but that gets me ahead of the story. When they came to 559 River Road, there were other children there. He said there were only about 6 trees on the property. So he said to me the day when I was visiting him there, any trees you see, mostly we planted. That's a lot of trees. By this time in their lives, they were familiar with agriculture, and they raised chickens there as well as other vegetables. He told me they had about 800 chickens, 2 chicken houses where the chickens were up on racks, but only 3 or 4 roosters, because roosters will fight, and you don't want your roosters killing off your hens. So they sold the chickens. Sometimes people wanted not just a whole chicken. Sometimes they wanted the chicken plucked and quartered. Somebody's ringing. Plucked and quartered, and they would take it away that way. Other times they would just take the chicken themselves and wring their necks. They also sold chicken feathers because you had to stuff your mattresses and your pillows with something. And I think the alternative was horsehair, which was not nearly as comfortable as a feather. So they sold feathers, and of course they sold eggs. So they made a way pretty well there at 559 River Road. When they were children, they went right up the street to Browns Lane, and there was a church. It was a Zion church. It was an AME church for sure. The name of it was Zion, as I understand. And there was also a school on that property. What was also there was a burial ground. The school and the church are both gone now. Those bodies have never been exhumed. The owners of the properties at this point have not wanted to go searching for remains. So still on Browns Lane, there are the remains of freedmen right there in Fairhaven. Such a history in Fairhaven, it's amazing. So they went to school there, they went to church there, they walked, they played up and down River Road, They did some fishing. They grew up. And the Second World War came along. Well, Raymond was the youngest. And when his older brothers enlisted, he wanted to go too, but he wasn't old enough. So somehow he managed to forge a document so that he could go to war too, and he did. And all three of them were in the Pacific Theater, and all three of them came back home in one piece, back to Fairhaven. They did not all stay in Fairhaven. Kenneth and William, I believe, moved both to Red Bank. But the younger Mr. Taylor stayed in Fairhaven, worked a lot of places. When he came back from the military, he came back to Fort Monmouth. That's where he was mustered out. He worked at Fort Monmouth for a while, but ultimately, with all the many jobs he had, he became head custodian for the Little Silver schools and retired from there after raising 7 children in that same little house where he was born. This was a 1-room, the living room and the kitchen, and above that, 3 bedrooms. Now his daughter has told me some of this history as well. And she said when they were growing up, the boys all slept in 2 rooms because it was 5 boys and 2 girls. And she said she always felt sorry for them because their rooms were not heated. The main heating source in this house was in the kitchen, a big old, probably a wood burning stove. It was used for cooking and heating. It worked for Mr. Taylor and his brothers, and he married Elizabeth, and they lived right there now, even until today, having raised their 7 children there. Their children have grown and gone. Some of the sons were here a couple of weeks ago for a visit. His daughter lives in, one daughter lives in Neptune, one daughter lives in Fairhaven. So those 2 are still close. And the thing that's interesting about Fairhaven at this point, and I'm going off my story a little bit, is that property values in Fairhaven now are not what they were, 40, 50 years ago. There are many old families whose homes have been sold because the parents were too old to be there, needed more help, and the young people, of course, wanted to move on, as young people do want to do often. The Robards is probably the name that is most familiar to many people. Robards, Bailey, Taylor, those are names that are known in Fairhaven. Now the Robards family, and this we're going back into the late 1700s, 1800s, they were oystermen, among fishermen and oystermen. And I was just fascinated, had no idea there was a oystering right here. And apparently the oyster beds were very plentiful. And the natives always traveled to those oyster beds. More than one time a year, I would imagine. I'll have to get with Claire on that and see how much she knows. However, I'm going to wrap this up because we have to have time for questions. I'm ready.
Okay. We
So-
will have to do a whole program, Lorraine, on Fairhaven.
Oh, yeah, well, I have
We
more
wanna-
research to do.
Yeah, we want to have a little time for questions though.
Yes, that's right. So I'm wrapping it up now. I'm good. I'm true to what you told me. So Mr. Taylor, thankfully, is still alive and still pretty well. He even put on his some of his regalia from his war years for us when we came to talk that day. The family That part of the family remains there now, but African Americans have disappeared from Fairhaven. And so he is one of only a handful of families who have been there for years and years, who remains. And more to be revealed. Thank you.
Thank you.
My story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so much, Lorraine.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Everything.
I don't have anything in the chat.
Oh my God.
I would like to say one thing.
Okay, Claire.
Robards, Mrs. Robards was in the family house there on De Normandy
Yes.
all her life. That was the family home until she passed. Her taxes were $85,000 a year, right on the river. So I think the town turned it into Green Acres, settled with her two sons. Her son Donnie was in our wedding. We were all friends from St. Thomas in Red Bank. And one thing about the Corleys, some of the deeds in my family have the name Corleys in them. They bought land from the Corleys, Benjamin Corleys, I think, goes back, way into the 1800s and 1700s. So he was an original buyer up of land in Monmouth County. And his name is, there's a Corleys Avenue in Neptune, which goes right into Ocean Grove. There's Corleys old farmhouse right in Eatontown. There's a track there down near Lowe's. The original Monmouth Park track was there. So very, very historic name, Corleys, for Monmouth County.
We have someone with us, Rob, who has told us he has some photos and Fairhaven Black history to share. Rob, you're still with us?
Up here.
Hi,
Okay, can you hear me now?
we can.
We can.
Excellent. All right.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
That's okay. I don't know if I can do a screen share.
Well,
I guess
I can get, if I can find you, I can get you to share.
because if I can share my computer screen, I have some photos for y'all. While you're preparing that, let me just give a little background there. I had the pleasure of being with Claire as we interviewed Mr. Raymond Taylor. If it shows up, I'll get the photo up of
You
him
can share
also.
it now, Rob. I gave you the ability to share it.
Okay, so I should be able to share my computer screen.
You should.
Okay, let's see what we can bring up here. One second. One moment, please.
And Rob, you were with me last week. You were with Lorraine.
Correct. I was with Claire. I mean, with Lorraine. I've been with Claire also a long time ago.
Right.
Anyhow, let me talk a little bit as I go to try and do the technical of bringing up some photos for y'all. Let's start with the community land. There's a body of land known as the Rumson Neck. For those of you that know the Red Bank area, there's the Tower Hill Church. At the foot of the Tower Hill Church is Prospect Avenue, which runs from the river all the way through Little Silver. So if you use that as the western boundary and you look at all of the land from there all the way towards Seabright, that's what's sometimes referred to as the Rumson Neck. It's actually Shoe Shop Ponnering. It's what it really is. In fact, the name Shrewsbury Township was an Anglicization of Shoe Shop Ponnering. Approximately in the year 1647, an English trust company of 10 men thought they purchased this landmass. The original deed, a certified copy, is over at the Monmouth County Hall of Records. The original sits in Federal Hall at the corner of Wall and Broad Street in Manhattan. And when you read it, you will see they never purchased the land. The land patent, that's what deeds were called back then, clearly states that the native Lenape had granted the right to fish, hunt, and I don't want to say a boat, I can't think of the word there, but to reside. It was not a sale of land. As Claire has mentioned earlier, land was never sold. The concept of selling land was never a part of the indigenous culture. Anyhow, from there, approximately 1830 was the first church that was built in the entire community. It was built near Browns Lane in Fairhaven. That is the Zion AME Church, which is one of the very first AME churches in the country. But prior to that, they met in the home of Mr. Samuel Still, who owned the land. If you know anything about Fairhaven, I'll try and put up a map from that period also for you once I get to the technology. But that land from Fairhaven Road all the way to where the Shrewsbury River Yacht Club is, and between River Road and the river, was all owned by Mr. Still, and eventually it was parceled off. Where Mr. Still lived was almost opposite where Browns Lane is today. Other Fairhaven family names from Browns Lane would be the Rileys and the Browns, of course. When the AME Zion Church burned down, they moved to Red Bank. However, in 1882, the Fisk AME Chapel was established, which was another AME chapel. When you look at the history of New Jersey and New Jersey's Black history, an interesting place is to start with the AME churches. Another early one, which just in the past week or two I learned so much about, is out in an area that's known as the Sourland Mountains. The current town names there are Hopewell and Hillsborough. But all these AME churches were founded at the same time that the Mother AME Church was founded in Charlestown, South Carolina. That one was founded around 1808. The second and third one, fourth ones is what is today the Mother AME Church, which is in Philadelphia, and the AME Church in Fairhaven and the AME Church in Sourland would be 4 or 5 of the earliest AME churches. With regard to, go ahead.
Rob, I just want to, right now your screen is still dark. If you can try to put something up. I do have a question from somebody.
Let me try and get the photos up.
Okay.
I have quite a few here. I have about 4 or 5.
Let me just interrupt for a minute, if I could, Rob. We do have a question from Eileen, who is near the Trenton area, and she was wondering what Native American tribes might be in that area, and are they still there?
In the greater Trenton area, of course, there's the Ramapo to the south. Claire can get better clarification of the ones, I want to say the Menacing, I forget the name. There's a large creek area in the greater Trenton area that also had, all these were Lenape to the best of my knowledge. Claire can correct me on that. But in the greater Trenton area, out near Allentown, New Jersey these days, is a major wildlife area. So they were located there also, besides on the Ramapo Creek, which is down near Burlington. They also had settlements.
Rob, thank you. Let's let Claire, I think that was directed to her.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No problem.
The Ramapo are located in northern New Jersey. They straddle the New York, New Jersey border. So they're way, way up north.
Mhm.
2.5 hours from here. The Natticoke is another group that's kind of mid-state near Bridgeton and probably closer to Trenton. The Powhatan had the reservation state park that they kind of rented from the state of New Jersey at Rancocas. Those are the three state recognized tribes, New Jersey recognized groups. In
My
New Jersey.
apologies. I was referring to the Rancocas down by the Rancocas Creek, which is near Burlington.
Right.
There's a town Riverside where the Rancocas Creek comes out and meets the Delaware River. Another Indian name, Delaware, or I'm sorry, indigenous name, Delaware. Just a moment, I'm going to bring up these pictures for you now that I got the technology working. So let's go with the pictures now.
Well, actually, Delaware was named after the governor, Delaware, and
Thank you for the correction.
they shortened it to Delaware. They were called Delaware's Indians, the people that lived in the area of New Jersey. But that's not an Indian word. It's
My apologies.
I thought it was, yeah.
Hey, so Rob, as you're pulling up your pictures, Claire, I have a question for you. As you were naming, let me turn my camera off. As you were naming all of the areas in New Jersey that still carry Native names, it's interesting to me that while those names are so familiar to us, that a lot of people don't know that they are indeed Native names. Like,
right.
how do you explain that dichotomy if you've thought about it?
The names go back to deeds. So the deeds that were settled or bargained or whatever went back to certain groups, and those groups had those names like Manasquan or Matawan or Matitaconk or whatever it is. And those names are still on the map because those were the people that deed was, the deal was made with that group. Now, these deeds are kept in the vault in the State Department in Trenton. You can see them, and you can see the signatures. You can see the boundaries and all the rest of what was signed. So if there ever was a question about the land, these deeds have the name of the people that they settled with, and that's why the names are still there on the maps. And I didn't pull them all up. I just pulled a few, but.
No. I think my question though, and the thing that's interesting to me is that at the time where there's historical fact that these are the deeds and these were the people that were here, there seems to be in some instances sort of like an effort to sort of change what the history is. And so like that dichotomy, like there's the evidence that natives were here, but in schools or just in life, we don't even acknowledge, right, that natives had
like
much.
Cheesequake,
Right.
and Wickatunk, and
Yeah.
I mean, just all over our names, that even the states, the state, 50 of our half of our states have the original names of the people that live there. It's just a concept that it has to be reviewed and reminded to each generation where the names have come from and the original people and why we still have the names Wanamassa and Navesink and Locust.
Claire, if I may, can anybody see the picture that I have up? I don't know if it's sharing right now.
Yeah, we can see
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so this is my favorite of all the photographs I've accumulated over time. This is the Fairhaven Steamboat dock, which was a little bit east of the current Fairhaven dock. This is where the oyster beds were. The Shrewsbury oysters, as they were known as, were cherished in Manhattan. The steamboats, the two steamboats that served the area were the Seabird and the Albertina. But when you look at the photograph, you'll see that every person at the dock is of dark skin. There is not one person in the photograph of white skin. And the reality of the Fairhaven Freeman history in Fairhaven is that, you know, if you go back to the early 1800s, perhaps 80% of the population of Fairhaven were people of color. It was just a small percentage that were not of color in Fairhaven. I'm going to try and take us through some of these photos that I have here. Just got to bear with me as I get the technology working a little better.
Rob, we only have a couple minutes left, though, so
I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to put photos up.
unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes. I don't know if there are any other questions. These are great photographs.
I actually have a question for Claire. This is Patty. So
Okay.
actually, I should say it's for Lorraine. Lorraine, you mentioned that there is a burial ground still on Browns Lane in Fairhaven. And I'm wondering if there's any efforts, thoughts, interest in preserving that.
From what I have learned, there is no interest in disturbing the site because the current property owners do not wish to do anything. So that it's just a moot point. It's their land and they don't want to do a dig or anything. So that's
Okay. So nothing will happen until that changes.
That is correct.
Okay.
And I want to say quickly, because I forgot, Ella Corliss Bailey lived until she was 102 years old.
Wow.
And she didn't die at home. She died in the Geraldine Thompson nursing home, which was a county, I believe, nursing home. And Kerwin, it's not a dichotomy. It's just a matter that the folks who put together curriculum and teach are not interested in teaching the whole truth. And I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I just make one comment. This photo is of the Polhamus home located in what's now called Colts Neck. Claire can talk quite a bit about it, but there is a connection between the Polhamuses and Fairhaven because descendants of the Polhamuses are the Berries of Fairhaven. I won't say more than that. Claire, I know, can talk quite a bit about the Polhamuses. I will say that the Polhamuses founded the very first Dutch church in what is now called Brooklyn in the early 1600s. Was the Reverend Daniel Polhamus, I'm sorry, the Reverend Johannes Polhamus. This is the home of his son, Daniel Polhamus, where the family burial ground is. Claire might talk to that later. I'm done.
Okay.
I'm gonna
All
turn
right,
off
thank
my
you so much
screen
for
and-
sharing.
We're all done.
Yeah, we gotta wrap up now. Rob, thank you for sharing. Any other questions that we have about tonight's program? Anyone?
I have a question for Claire.
Yes.
Okay, Lynn, I had seen a book, we have a book at the library, and I showed Linda of the Ramapo Mountain people. You just mentioned Ramapo up in North Jersey, straddling over the New Jersey, New York line.
Right.
And I've had one of my cousins, had kind of talked to me about that. I don't know exactly what the story is, but there were people like from Hillburn, New York, and then right over the line in New Jersey. I'm not sure if it was Sussex County, but it seems like there's a really interesting history there with the Dutch and Native people and African-American people, with a lot of names like Van Dunk and DeFries or something.
Right.
I had seen some of that, and I had heard of one of the things that some of the people were referred to as the Jackson Whites, and I had heard that term a long time ago, from one of our friends. So that seems like a really interesting kind of enclave up in that area.
Yeah, they have a pretty long history that goes back to the 1600s.
Okay, okay.
Oh.
Well, look, thank you.
Well, I think if no one else has questions, I think we're ready to turn to Patty to wrap up our program for tonight. Patty White.
So I want to thank everybody for coming, but special warm thanks to Claire and Lorraine for such a beautiful presentation of our local history and bringing it, what we think is old history into present day. Between the two of you, you're a wealth of knowledge for our community and our area, and I really look forward to seeing you again in the future. I also want to recognize folks from our little committee that are here tonight. This is a volunteer effort that we've been putting on for almost 6 years, initiated by Linda in August of 2015. So there's Linda, who works at the library. Claire Phelps also works at the library. Kerwin Webb and I are here tonight. And we have a few other members that also have contributed quite a bit to the success of this program. And in fact, we like to always encourage anyone who thinks you'd like to do a similar program in your community, reach out to us. We can give you some tips and pointers and ideas, because we really would like this to be replicated everywhere in as many places as possible. There's an abundance of stories and history. And speaking of stories, our next program will be June 30th. It's always the last Wednesday of the month. June 30th, we're going to have Dr. Walter Grayson from Monmouth University. We'll be doing a program on Juneteenth. In case you don't know what Juneteenth is, it is the celebration of the day in 1865, on June 19th, actually, when the Union soldiers came to Texas and told everyone that the war was over, but especially they told the enslaved people there that they were free. Even though the news from the Emancipation Proclamation, which was 2.5 years earlier, never reached them. And even when the news reached them that the war was over 2 months after the surrender of the South, it still was not well received. But because it was such a momentous event, we're hearing more now about the importance of Juneteenth to our Black family. So please mark your calendars. And one more announcement. Claire mentioned, and Lorraine as well, some African-American burial grounds in our area. And last month, Rick Gefkin, who wrote a story about slavery in New Jersey, also mentioned the Cedar View Cemetery, which is right in Lincroft. So if you go down Route Newman Springs Road from either direction, if you get to Hurley's Lane, you just turn in there north, and it's right next to the property of St. Leo's Church. So next Monday, May 31st, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there will be a Memorial Day ceremony at this cemetery. This is a plot of land that was sold to a group of Black families in the late 1800s, and there are a number of veterans who are buried there. So the Memorial Day ceremony will be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Again, thank you everyone who came, everyone who participated. Lorraine and Claire, thank you so much as always. I look forward to doing this in person someday soon.
Ooh, what a concept.
Yes.
I don't
Well,
know
have
if
a
you
big
see the
party.
last photo, but that's Mr. Ray Taylor in that photo there at the Memorial Day Parade from a few years ago. I don't know if you all can see the screen or not.
No.
You don't have the screen? Okay.
No.
Oh, there he is.
There he
Got
is.
it? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
Thank
the
you, Rob.
Fairhaven
Thank you
Memorial
very
Day
much for
Parade.
sharing that, Rob.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rob.
thank
That
you.
was the
Great.
subject of my story. So thank you very much, Rob, for
Very,
sharing
very
that with
nice.
us.
Wonderful, right?
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.